Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar on the California Relief Grant Program for small businesses and nonprofits. And so I'm Jan Masaoka. I'm the CEO of the California Association of Nonprofits. We say CalNonprofits for short. And welcome to this session on how to apply for the California Relief Grant for small businesses and nonprofits. And before we get started on the how-to part of this, we have a special guest. You know how they say on talk shows, we have like a special guest, and that's what we have today. And we have Assemblymember Luz Rivas with us today. And just to introduce her briefly, she not only represents the 39th District, which is in the San Fernando Valley, but she is also a champion for nonprofits statewide because she chairs the Assembly Committee on the nonprofit sector. And a word about her background: while working as an electrical engineer at Motorola with a degree from MIT, she founded and became the executive director of a nonprofit called DIY Girls. And not only that, but she is a longtime advocate. She's still on the board of California Girls and the California Girls in STEM Collaborative. And she's also one of the people that made it possible for this program to include nonprofits by her standing up for nonprofits everywhere that she is. So, Assembly Member, please be welcome.
Thank you, Jan, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to CalNonprofits for hosting this webinar for our nonprofit friends. I'm Assemblymember Luz Rivas. I represent the 39th Assembly District, which is in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. This is where I grew up. I'm also the founder of a nonprofit that's in the San Fernando Valley in my district. And so I always try to work on things that make things easier for nonprofits, right? Because I remember what it was like to be an executive director and founder of a nonprofit. And, during the pandemic, so many nonprofits stepped up and met the need of their own community members. I know in my community, we had food banks and other organizations that didn't wait until the state's response to COVID or a federal response, right? They right away organized and provided their community with what they needed. And I was so proud of the nonprofit sector for doing that. But we need to support them. Now that I'm at the state level as a state representative, I really believe we need to step up and help our nonprofits. And a lot of that is financial help. And that's why we're all here today. I was one of the legislators that, fought for the inclusion of nonprofits in this grant program. Originally, it was designed only for small businesses. But as you all know, nonprofits also have, they need to keep the doors open and pay their staff or provide the services. And that all takes financial resources to do, right? Even if you have an all volunteer organization, nothing is free, right? And I think a lot of people don't understand that, as that are outside of the nonprofit sector. And so I was very excited that we did include nonprofits. And I think right now, last year at the height of the pandemic, people were looking for financial, some type of financial aid to keep afloat. But there is still financial resources available, like this grant relief program available to nonprofits. And I know that that's why a lot of you are here, to find out how to apply, whether you qualify. And I encourage you to apply, because this is money that is allocated for you, for the nonprofit sector. And we want to give it to you. The state wants to help you. And I'm glad that CalNonprofits will guide you through that process of how to apply and answer your questions today. So I want to thank all of you for your service to our communities. Thank you, CalNonprofits. And I hope you get your questions answered today. These are the experts. CalNonprofits are advocates for you. They fight for you at the state level. And this program shows that their advocacy works because they made it happen. And so I hope that you get what you need from this webinar. And again, thank you for everything that you do for our communities in the state of California.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. Thank you so much for coming and giving us such a great welcome and a great context for doing this. Okay, everybody, let's get started getting some money. Okay, so just a word about ourselves at the California Association of Nonprofits, CalNonprofits for short. And you just heard the Assembly member talk about how nonprofits got added to this program. And to me, that's one of the I'm just so happy that we were able, along with our allies like Assemblymember Rivas, to make that happen. And so far, in fact, with this program, more than 7,500 nonprofits have received grants totaling more than $98 million. So this is a big program. It's not one of those programs where thousands of people apply and like 3 people get grants. So I think that's even more of a reason to go ahead and be sure that you apply for this grant. California Nonprofits we're a policy alliance of more than 10,000 nonprofits, and we're able to bring webinars to you like this for free, in large part because of the support of our membership. One of the main things we do is help nonprofits work with government, including advocating for and accessing for additional funding. I want to let you know that we are an application partner for this particular program, which means we have a partner portal. We encourage you to use the CalNonprofits partner portal, but we'll help everybody regardless of what portal they're using. We don't get any extra money, based on people using our portal, so just want to make sure that you knew that as well. One of the main reasons we want to promote this program is because its priorities are so in sync with what we do at nonprofits. So the priorities are typically marginalized communities, such as rural communities, communities of color, arts and culture nonprofits, and small nonprofits. So these are particularly the kind of work that nonprofits do, and where we're located, so it's especially an important one for us to apply for. So we all kind of know who's in the room. We're going to do a quick poll. Henry Duong is one of our off-camera supports today. Henry, can you go ahead and put up the poll? Right. So this will just give us a quick chance to get to know everybody. So please start by telling us your application status, whether or not you've applied yet. You started one but didn't finish it. You filled out the wrong application, like you filled out the for-profit one instead of the nonprofit one, or your application is still in process and you're waiting to hear. The second question is, what kind of help are you most likely to use? What should we be emphasizing in our work with you? More webinars like this, detailed FAQs, the ability to talk to an expert by phone, or individual help walking through the application. This program closes in 2 weeks. It's September 30th. So we're right at, kind of at the last stage of this program. So I think it's most important for us to get you the kind of help that's going to be the most useful to you. So while you're voting, I am going to take the chance just to introduce our 2 main speakers, as well as our off-camera team. I mentioned Henry Duong. Vanessa Cruz on our staff is also doing off-camera support today, and our closed captioner is Jean Cregan. So thanks very much to you guys. And our 2 main speakers today are Lucy Salcido Carter, our policy director, who leads our policy work, including the work getting programs like this to happen. And she works with legislators, helps us write and submit amicus briefs to courts on behalf of nonprofit issues, and is just really leads our efforts standing up for nonprofits all across the state. And then Sue Sigler, who's also here today, she doesn't like this, but she's probably the world's top expert on this program and how nonprofits can succeed in it. And she's available and phone by in person, but also she has taken so many individual cases and gone to legislature and CalOSBA, the administrators of the program, and worked through individual casework. So in some ways, I think of her as a caseworker for every single nonprofit applying for this program. Okay, so let's see the poll results now. Oh gosh, wow, almost everybody hasn't applied yet. Okay, just a few people are another category. So that's so great. And it also reminds me that means there's a lot of people that if you haven't applied yet, it means that you probably haven't heard about it till recently. So I hope that all of you will not only apply, but also think about, who do I know, like my next door neighbor or my second cousin, right, that should know about this program that doesn't yet already. So thanks, this helps us a lot. And the type of help that you want, oh gosh, okay, all kinds. Okay. All right, so, but especially phone, it looks like phone came in ahead. So we will be giving you Sue's phone number in a few minutes. All right, so with that kind of introduction, I'm going to turn it now over to Lucy and Sue.
And we're going to start with one of the most frequently asked questions that we receive, which is if you have already received a grant from this program, can you receive a second grant? And I wish you could, but unfortunately the answer is no. You can only receive one grant from this program regardless of what round you applied in. And notice that, and something we want everybody to know is that unfortunately there are some scam artists and fraudsters out there. And so we want to avoid interacting with them. So we want you to know that applying for this program is completely free. And we're referencing Lendistry a couple of times. And as we saw, we had Assemblymember Rivas with us here, who was one of the legislators who was responsible for helping nonprofits qualify for these funds. And funds were provided by the California legislature through the Cal Office of the Small Business Advocate. And Lendistry is the private company that was selected to administer the grant program and build the website. So you'll receive communications from lendistry.com. Those are legitimate. And Lendistry's website is careliefgrant.com. If you don't land on any other website, please. There are some that imitate it by having a close spelling or a .org suffix, and interact only with your application and online and with Lendistry. Next slide, please. We also want you to know that we have lots of resources available to help you place a successful application. And this is a screenshot from our website. You'll see on the home page that blue box on the right that'll lead you to all of the resources that you need to be able to successfully complete an application. When you click on See Our Grant Guide, you'll also see a link for our frequently asked questions, or FAQs. And I'll be mentioning those a lot because those were designed as a companion to you as you're filling out your application. And we encourage all applicants, all nonprofit applicants, to read through that before you begin your application. I'll also note that our webinar today is going to be focused on nonprofit applicants, but small businesses are eligible to apply as well. And we advise you to take a look at careliefgrant.com, where there are also lots of resources for small businesses, including applications and information in other languages. And there are free webinars every day of the week in multiple languages for small business applicants. Next slide, please. I mentioned a moment ago that there were different funding rounds for this program. Today is the last day of round 7, which has $1 billion available, and did not accept any new applicants, but rather was to help applicants who have already applied and who were on the waiting list. And there are 2 rounds that are open right now. Round 8 is for select arts and cultural organizations, and we'll talk in a little bit about who those organizations are that are eligible to apply in round 8. And round 9 is for all nonprofits and small businesses. Whether you're a new applicant, they will continue to process waitlisted applications during round 9. Round 8 applicants may want to consider applying in both rounds because you may not have a funding decision on your round 8 application before the round 9 deadline closes. And Jan mentioned a moment ago that there were some applicants who chose the wrong form of application, meaning a small business application rather than a nonprofit, and those applicants can reapply in round 9. We do want to note that the last day for applications for rounds 8 and 9 is September 30th, and it's at 5 p.m. I think some nonprofit organizations are used to seeing those application opportunities available until midnight, but please do note that the application closes at 5 p.m. on September 30th. Next slide, please. A little bit of information for those who have already applied. You can log in and check your application status whenever you like, and there's complete instructions on that on the FAQs on our website. We mentioned a moment ago that you can only receive 1 grant from this program, so if you've already been funded, you don't need to reapply. Waitlisted applications automatically roll over to future rounds for consideration. And so if you are on the wait list, you do not need to reapply in round 9. And again, we'll touch on a moment on those qualifying arts and cultural organizations. Next slide, please. When you've already placed an application and you go to log back in, this is the grant status that you'll see. And one of the most important things is to make sure that you filled out the proper form of application for your type of organization. If you see in blue or purple there, the code CRG, that means you filled out a small business application. If you see CRG NPO, that means that you filled out the nonprofit application. And if you see CRG AC NPO, that means that you filled out an arts and cultural application. This is something we really want to draw to the attention of applicants from way back in the beginning of this year, January and February in rounds 1 and 2. Unfortunately, the way that the applications displayed in the partner portals was a little difficult to tell that there were 2 to choose from, and a number of people filled out the wrong type of application. So if you're on the waiting list from rounds 1 and 2, please be sure that you log in, check which application you filled out, and if need be, you can still reapply during round 9 before 5 p.m. on September 30th. Next slide, please.
Sue,
Also,
can I just jump in? Sorry to interrupt. If somebody did complete the wrong application and were denied, and they are going to reapply in round 9, should they use a different email address or the same email address that they used before?
Thank you, Lucy, because that's a really important point. We want everybody to know that Lendistry tracks applications in their system by email address. And if you try to place an application, more than one application using the same email address, it won't be accepted. So if anybody needs to reapply, it's important that the next application you fill in, you use a different email address than you've supplied in a prior application.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And on the slide here, we see these are the possible statuses that you could see when you log in to check your application. If it's incomplete, you can go ahead and complete it. If you see a waiting selection process or you're on the waiting list, there's no need to reapply unless you see that you filled out the wrong application. Other than that, your application remains in the system and will automatically be considered. A selected pending validation process, selected pending validations means that your application has been selected for processing and Lendistry is currently verifying your information. That selected word is a little confusing for some nonprofits. It does not mean that you have been selected to receive a grant. It means that your application has been selected for processing. When you are selected to receive a grant, your application status will change to in closing, docs out, pending for funding. And then after your money has been transferred, you'll see that your status will change to grant funded. A little bit about how the process works at Lendistry. When you first fill in an application, whether you complete it or not, once you've supplied an email address, it will generate an email from the Lendistry system to that email address with a login link and a temporary password. You should save that email, pardon me, you should save that email so that you can find it again in the future, because you can use it to return to your application or check your status anytime you like. And there are many different partner portals, and you need to go through the right one whenever you want to return to your application or status. So you want to use the link in that email. Once your application has been approved, you will then receive an email from Lendistry, an email from DocuSign with a grant agreement. That's how you'll know when you've been approved for funding. That grant agreement will be live in DocuSign for 3 days, and once you sign it, you will move into the funding process. If you miss that email for any reason and more than 3 days has passed, you can always give a call to Lendistry and ask them to send another. They'll do that. Okay, next slide, please. Now, how do you know if you should apply in round 9? Again, if you're already on the wait list or a waiting selection process and you've verified that you use the correct form of application, there's nothing for you to do now. Your application will automatically be considered. However, if you noted that you used the wrong application form in an earlier round, go ahead and reapply using a different email address if you're a first-time applicant. If you applied in rounds 4 or 8, but you haven't moved to funding yet, you can also place an application in round 9, but again, be sure that you have used a different email address than you provided in your prior application. And now we're going to turn to Lucy and say, do we have questions about folks who have already applied?
We do. We have some questions for people who are just applying that have to do with the information you've just shared. Can you
Thank you.
clarify again that there is a different application for rounds 8 and 9?
There is. Excuse me. So there are different application forms for rounds 8 and 9. There are 2 different places that you log in. Round 8 does not require that you select a partner. There is only one application portal for round 8, and you can find a quick link to that on our website and in our FAQs. Round 9 does require a partner selection, and Jan talked about that a moment ago. No matter who you choose as your partner, we are here to assist you. You'll see my email address on the bottom of most of these slides, so feel free to contact me with any questions, and do double check that you filled out the form of application that you intended to.
And how can people get to our portal so that they can complete the application?
We'll have the portal up in a little bit, but we really recommend that everybody go to the FAQs on our website, and it will give you not only a quick and easy place to start your application, but as we'll see in a few minutes, some of the questions on the application are a little tough for nonprofits, and we want to be sure that you know how to answer those properly.
And you'll be explaining some of the different qualifications between rounds 8 and 9, right? So folks are asking about that.
We will.
Okay, great.
We will, but we'll take a moment to do that right now. The main difference between 8 and 9 is that round 8 is for select arts and cultural organizations. And we'll talk in a few minutes about how to determine if you qualify for round 8. And pardon me. And for round 8 differs from round 9 in that there is no maximum revenue cap for your organization. Round 9 is available to smaller nonprofits and small businesses, and that's defined as those that have between $1,000 and $2.5 million in revenue. And round 8, you do have to have at least $1,000 in revenue, but there is no maximum qualification. So an arts and cultural nonprofit of any size can qualify for round 8.
Great, thank you. We had a question about somebody who applied right at the beginning of round 8, but missed the first deadline and were denied for a late submission. But now that there's been an extension on round 8, should they reapply, or will they hear from Lendistry? What should they do?
Let's see. I would like that person to contact me personally, please. So my email is there on the footer of the slide and will continue to be up. And please contact me personally and let's talk through your situation.
Okay. And I know you're going to say a little bit more about how people find out if they qualify as an arts organization, so we'll wait on that one. But once an application is in, can you give a rough idea of when people can expect to get some kind of notification from Lendistry?
So Lendistry does not necessarily send out notifications on every step of the process. You will not receive a notification that says thank you for submitting or that your application is complete. And Lendistry will contact you during their validation process if they have any questions. If they don't have any questions, the next thing that you'll see is that email from DocuSign with your grant agreement. Lendistry also doesn't send out notices when they provide funding. And one of the most frequent questions that I get is, I've been approved for funding. When will I see the funds? And the answer is there is no firm timetable. It can take several weeks. The best thing to do is to watch your bank account for those funds to appear there.
And then this is more of a statement than a question, but I'd love to have you add on to it. I just want to clarify that this is a grant program. It's not a forgivable loan program like some of the federal programs that people know about, the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL. Those are loan programs, and the PPP is forgivable. This is a state program, and it is a grant program. And Sue, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Only that you are correct, Lucy. Funds from this program do not need to be repaid.
Okay, great. I think we can move on.
Thank you. Next slide, please. One of the big questions folks have is how much can I apply for? And this is a screenshot of a drop-down menu on the application where you'll be asked what level of grant are you applying for. And you don't get to choose the grant that you'd like to have. You get to choose the grant that you grant amount that you qualify for. And the way that that Industry will determine what grant level you qualify for is by looking at your 2019 990. Most of those list your gross revenue, and some don't. We'll talk about that in a moment. But they'll be looking at your gross revenue from 2019. And if you are showing between $1,000 and $100,000, you qualify for a grant of $5,000. If you're showing between $100,000 and $1 million, your grant amount would be $15,000. And from $1 million to $2.5 million in round 9 for $25,000. And as we mentioned, there's no 2.5 income cap for round 8 for the arts and cultural organizations. Next slide, please. Now we'll talk a little bit about other eligibility qualifications. For nonprofits, you must be a 501c3, C6, or C19, a corporation, an unincorporated association, or a cooperative. You have to have a 990 tax return filed for 2019 that shows a California address. And I get a lot of questions about, can I provide something other than the 990 tax return? And the answer is no. Industry will only qualify organizations who have a 990 tax return for 2019 available. We just talked a moment ago about the annual revenue qualification. You also have to have been in operation prior to June 1st, 2019. This is not a general support program for nonprofits, nor is it intended for startups. It is in recognition of the tough time that many nonprofits and small businesses have had operating during COVID times. You must have a physical address in California, and Industry will verify your address, and they do some pretty rigorous validation to ensure that the applicants that they can verify the applicant and the organization is who you say you are. This poses some problems for nonprofits who typically use a PO box. You can't put a PO box into your application, but you can use the home address of a staff or board member, and it doesn't have to be the same person who you list as the applicant on your application. You have to have either remained open during COVID times or have a plan to reopen whenever you're permitted. And you had to have at least $1 in qualifying expenses. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Next slide, please. Organizations who would not be eligible to qualify for this funding are those that are departments or programs of larger organizations. Think maybe a university department, or many programs in larger nonprofits file grants just for their own support for that program. And it needs to be the organization that files the 990 that is the eligible applicant. Fiscally sponsored organizations don't file their own 990s, so unfortunately they do not qualify. And religious institutions can qualify under a very narrow set of circumstances. So please see our FAQs for more information on that. Excuse me. And next slide, please.
So can I just jump in with a couple of clarifications about the 990? We had a question about the postcard. Is that acceptable? And if not, what else should an applicant do?
I was just going to talk about that. Thank you.
Oh, great. Okay.
So we'll go there first. We talked about you have to have filed the 2019 Form 990, but some of the shorter forms don't list your gross revenue. And as we've seen, that's how you qualify for the grant overall and for a particular grant level. So those folks that file the short forms, like the postcard, need a bit of additional documentation that does show your revenue. That could be your state RRF1 form. If you're not familiar with that, please see our FAQs. There's a quick and easy way to see your state form. Or it could be as simple as a financial report or a bank statement from 2019 showing that you had gross revenue in excess of $1,000. One of the other things is that you'll be asked to name an applicant and an individual, and that person has to be showing on the statement of information that you have on file with the California Secretary of State. Again, our FAQs have a quick and easy link if you'd like to review your form or if you need to update it. And if you're familiar with those forms, it names 3 principals from your organization, typically that are board members and perhaps the CEO. It also names your agent for service. You need to make sure that your applicant name is among the 3 principals for your organization. The applicant can also be the agent for service, but the applicant name cannot be listed only as the agent for service on your statement of information. And if you didn't file your 990 for 2019 yet, many people take extensions, go ahead and apply and then provide that 990 as soon as you have it available. We don't yet know what the final day is that the industry will accept 990 or other types of documentation, but you do have a little more time beyond the deadline to provide those if it's not available yet. Next.
Just quickly, we have a question. If an organization has changed addresses because they have a different executive director than they did when they originally applied, will there be a problem verifying the California address? Or perhaps they mean that the address has changed, from when they filed some of the forms, so the forms will reflect a different address from their application. What problems might they encounter? Yeah.
That should not be a problem. However, if Lendistry has any questions while they're processing your application, they will contact you by email. And if you prefer, you can simply type out a little note on a Word document, very brief, that says our address changed, and you can upload that with any one of your other documents to your application.
And then we have one more clarification around the 990. Is the 2019 990 the one filed in 2019 describing 2018, or the one filed in 2020 describing 2019?
I get this question also from organizations whose fiscal years cross over the calendar year. So anytime you file a 990, right at the top in the center in big bold letters, it's going to state 1 year. You want to choose the one that says 2019 at the top, regardless of what your fiscal year is.
Thank you. And then just one more. I know you've got a lot of information to cover. You mentioned that fiscally sponsored organizations cannot apply, but we have some particular circumstances here I want to run by you. They were fiscally sponsored in 2019, filed a 990 EZ for some revenue that did not go through their fiscal sponsor and are now their own 501c3. They've also submitted an RRF1 form for last year.
That's great, and thank you. We mentioned that you had to be in operation prior to June 1, 2019, but you don't have had to have your organizing documents by then. So if you have a Form 990 from 2019 and you have your 501c and your Articles of Incorporation currently, they don't have to be from prior to June 1, 2019. If you currently have those documents, you are eligible to apply.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. We're going to talk for a moment about qualifying expenses. And this program, as I mentioned, is a little bit different from most nonprofit applications. And again, because it's conceived as assisting with expenses that happened in the past rather than those that you're going to incur by providing the programs or services in the future. And you only need $1 of qualifying expenses in the time period of March 1st to December 31st, 2020. Those qualifying expenses can be some of your regular expenses or your occupancy expenses like rent, mortgage, utilities, insurance, payroll, anything that you had to spend related to operating during COVID. So for example, many organizations had to get themselves a Zoom account so that they could continue programs online. Equipment is an eligible expense if it was required to operate in the COVID environment. Think things like personal protective equipment, hand sanitizer, plexiglass, those sorts of things. But the one caveat on your qualifying expenses is that you can't double dip. What that means is that if the expense was already funded by a different funding source, you would not be able to count it as a qualifying expense for the purposes of this program. And when you receive your funds, it's also a little different than the way that we're used to operating in nonprofits. When you receive your funds, you don't have to go back and match your expenses. You don't have to go reopen your books. And you'll note that the grant amounts don't have a one-to-one relationship with your qualifying expenses. Essentially, if you do receive a grant, you can treat that as general operating funds and use the funds as you wish. And now I'm going to move into preparing to apply. Next slide, please. One thing we want to do is be sure to check your technology. The application will only interact well with Google Chrome. It was built for that platform. If you're using other browsers such as Firefox or Internet Explorer, you will see as you try to move through the application, it's likely to freeze up on you or to return errors. So please do use Google Chrome as your browser whenever you are interacting with the application, whether that's filling it out or returning to check your status. We have lots more tech tips, and you can see those on our FAQs on our website. Next slide, please. Also, in preparing to apply, you want to gather your documents. As we've discussed, the 990 form from 2019, but also your articles of incorporation, a current government issued ID for the applicant, and the application certification form. And I want to talk for a moment about what's required of the person who is named as the applicant on your application. That person will be required to provide their personal data, meaning their social security number and date of birth. As I mentioned earlier, Lendistry does rigorous validation of identity and in order to prevent fraud in the program. I get a lot of questions about, do I really have to provide that? It's unusual for nonprofits, but yes, it is required. That person will also need to provide a copy of a current government issued ID, think something like a license or a passport that has their photo on it. And then we reference the application certification form. Some people confuse the application certification form for the application itself, but it's a required attachment. And you can link to that quickly and easily through our FAQs or on the careliefgrant.com website. You want to be sure that you're choosing the proper form of application certification, which is either for nonprofits or small businesses. We spoke of, and moving down to, if these things apply to you, you'll provide them, but don't worry about it if you don't have them or don't need them. We mentioned if you need that additional documentation because you filed a short form of the 990, like your state RRF1 or other income documentation, you'll want to have that available. If you have something like a certificate of organization, a fictitious name registration, which is also known as a DBA or doing business as, or a government issued business license. Let me give you an example. Some residential programs may have a business license. I serve on the board of a community music center that has a business license from the city that it operates in. So again, if you don't have those things or they're not required, don't worry about it. Next slide, please.
Sue, can I just jump in here for a second?
Of
One
course.
one person is asking if they receive funds from the PPP or the EIDL, loan funds, can they still apply for this grant?
They can still apply for this grant, but you'll need to note what funds you've received from other government COVID sources, and we're going to cover that in a moment.
Okay, and then we just have one other question about expenses and fiscal year. One organization is asking, they have a July to June fiscal year. Can they share a financial report for January through December of 2019 that reflects gross revenue? They're asking because their gross revenue on the calendar year was lower than in the fiscal year.
Again, the only thing that will be acceptable to documenting your gross revenue for purposes of qualifying is your 2019 990. Your fiscal year is not relevant, and other documentation unfortunately won't be accepted.
Great, thank you.
Okay. The next step in preparing to apply is to locate your gross revenue, as we've been discussing. And then the application is also going to ask you for your gross revenue for a 6-month period in 2019 and the same period in 2020. So for your 2019, you want to include all sources of revenue. And in 2020, you want to report your gross revenue less any other government-sponsored COVID relief funds. And again, that could be from the federal government, like PPP or EIDL, or it could be from your state or county. And the reason you're going to separate that out is because it's asked, you're asked to report that on a different line in the application. These two periods will use to compare the impact of COVID on your organization. Most organizations saw a drop in revenue 2020 over 2019. But even if you didn't, go ahead and apply. It is not required that you had a drop in revenue year over year. Next slide, please. Now we're going to be ready to start that application. Small businesses should go to careliefgrant.com. And if you'd like to choose a different partner than CalNonprofits, you'll see a list there as well. If you'd like to go right ahead and choose CalNonprofits as your partner, this is the link that you'll use to begin your application. CalNonprofits.mylendistry.com. And again, that's on our website and in our FAQs. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about what that application actually looks like. When you log in for the first time to start an application, some people get confused because they think they have to set up an account in order to apply, and that's not the way this site works. If you're logging in for the very first time to start an application, click where that red arrow is pointing that says click here to apply. As I mentioned, once you have provided an email address, you'll get that email from Lendistry with your temporary password. And then when you want to return to your application, either to upload your documents or provide additional info or to check your status, that's when you'll use that right side that says existing customers sign into your account. Next slide, please. We've talked.
So, we just had sorry to interrupt. We just had a request, and I don't know if you want to do it now, but somebody was asking for you to say a little bit more about the gathering document stage. And again, I don't know if you want to do that now or later.
Let's see, was there a specific question about gathering
Just saying that you
documents?
skipped part 2 of gathering documents. Please review.
Okay, we can go back to that slide, and thank you. On the top here is gather your documents. Those are the ones that are required. Down below are those if you have it available. I'm not sure what we were talking about as part 2, but again, the documents at the top are required. The ones below are to be provided if they are applicable. And if you have questions about that, this is also detailed in the FAQs on our website. So let's return to that slide with that black bar that shows us where to start an application. Thanks so much. The red arrow here is pointing to a black bar that says Grant Program for Nonprofits. And when you first log into the application portal, you will see that there are 2 applications to choose from. One will say Grant Program for For-Profits, and that's for small businesses. And you want to choose the one that says Grant Program for Nonprofits in the black bar. It's grayed out on my slide here, but underneath there's a button that says Apply Now that is live, and that's where you click to start your application. Next slide, please. The application has some features. One of those is every page has accessibility options if you need to use those. And on the right, you'll see the first page has an opportunity to select a language. The drop-down menu that you're looking at here is not inclusive of all of the languages that are available. Lendistry has added many more. So if you need language assistance, you can see the application in a language other than English. Next slide, please. On the first page of the application, that red arrow is pointing to a button that says watch video. When you first log in, you can choose to watch a video about how to apply if you'd like. And that other red arrow on the bottom center of this slide is showing you a question that confuses many applicants. And so we want to highlight that. You'll notice at the top, it says owner details, and then of course, authorized representative if you're a nonprofit organization. But the application will ask you, please give us the owner's name. That would be the person who is named as your applicant. And that red arrow is pointing to a question that says, what is your percentage of ownership? You can enter 0% into there. Lendistry knows that nonprofits don't have any owners. Next slide, please. Here on the second page of the application, you will see that there is a drop-down menu highlighted by that red arrow that asks if you fall into one of the 4 priority areas. The 4 priority areas are emergency food, emergency housing, childcare, and workforce development activities such as assisting people in locating jobs or training people for new jobs. There's also an other choice. If you don't fall into one of the 4 priority areas, it doesn't mean that you don't qualify. You can select other and still qualify. Plenty of nonprofit organizations have received grants who don't fall under the 4 priorities. I'll make a note here that every answer on the application requires an answer in order for you to submit it. So please don't skip any questions. You'll see in places that there are drop-down menus that the answers that you have to choose among don't really fit your organization. Go ahead and choose something that you feel is closest and don't overthink it too much. You need to put an answer in every field so that you can move through the application. And some of the fields are data gathering as opposed to qualifications for the grant. Next slide, please. I want to highlight on this page that a couple of questions that people usually have questions about. You'll be asked to report the number of full-time equivalents for your employees, or FTEs. Most nonprofits are familiar with that, but if you're not, please see our FAQs. Do not count your independent contractors in your employee headcount because those people can apply on their own as small businesses. You'll be asked to report the number of jobs retained in 2020. And that's simply the number of employees that you had on December 31st, 2020. You'll be asked to report the number of jobs created in 2020. And that would be the number of people, if you created new jobs, it would be those jobs. Or if you had employees who were laid off and recalled in 2020, you would add those together. Next slide, please. We've already talked a bit about the drop-down menu that you'll see where you select your grant amount based on your 2019 annual revenue as reported on your 990 or in your additional documentation. Next slide, please. And we've got some arrows pointing here to some other questions that some folks sometimes find a little difficult to answer. On the top left there, it's pointing to what is your customer base? Is it B2B or B2C or both? And B2B means business to business, B2C means business to consumer, and most nonprofits are business to consumer. Those 2 arrows on the right and the top one on the side on the left are pointing to fields where we have selected the answer unknown. Once again, if you don't know the answer to the questions or the drop-down menus don't fit you, it's okay to select an unknown answer and move on. That second arrow over on the left is pointing to something that asks you for your NAICS code. NAICS stands for the North American Industrial Classification System. Larger nonprofits may be familiar with this or not, because some of the schedules on the 990 require it, or if you've done government contracting in the past, you'll have had to select your NAICS code. If you don't know your code, if you follow over to the right there, there's a button that says click here to find your NAICS code. And in our FAQs, we list contact for the US Census Bureau, which has a service called Dr. NACIS. You can call or email them and they'll help you choose your NAICS code. And this is where we want to linger for a moment for the round 8 arts and cultural applicants. Here's how you know if you'll qualify for round 8, which is only certain NAICS codes are eligible to apply in round 8. And our FAQs detailed that. So take a look there and see if your organization qualifies to apply in round 8. And if it doesn't, you can simply apply in round 9. Next slide, please. We're getting to the end of the application here, but we want to highlight a couple of questions. Top arrow on the left is pointing to a question that asks if it's a restatement of the priorities question. So if you answered yes, that you fall under one of the 4 priorities, they're going to ask you, did at least 51% of your revenue come from activities that count as the 4 priorities? That middle arrow is pointing to the 2 questions where you enter in that revenue data for those 2 6-month periods from 2019 and 2020. And the pink boxes down below are where you enter in the amounts and sources of any of your other government-sponsored COVID relief programs. Question 1 in the pink boxes only allows you to choose one source. And so if you have multiple sources, you want to choose the one that you got the most from. And question 2 asks, how much did you get? If you got from multiple sources, add your total in there. And then you need to do an extra step if you have multiple sources of other COVID relief funds. You need to type out a Word document that just shows your sources and the amounts and upload that with any of your other documents to the application. Next slide, please. You will see here on the slide that you don't have to finish your work all in one sitting. You can click save and continue later. And that red arrow is pointing to a line. When you get to this place, you will be asked to type or select from a drop-down menu the word yes. And this also gives you an opportunity to review the form of application that you have submitted. So you can see where it's underlined in this case, in this example, this applicant has chosen an arts and cultural nonprofit application. If you get to this place and you discover that you filled out the wrong application, close out of everything, start all over again, just like you were a brand new applicant, meaning don't try to log into this account, and start a new application using a different email address. Next slide, please. When all of your application on this part 1 is complete, you can hit submit. Another note is that once you hit submit, you can't return to how you answered your questions. You won't be able to view them, and unfortunately, this application doesn't give you an opportunity to print out and save your work in that way. So if you want to save your work, you want to take a screenshot of every page of the application. Next slide, please. What happens next is you get that email password from Lendistry, you log back in and you upload your documents. You'll see a list of documents, and please upload your documents under the proper category, but don't worry if you don't. Lendistry will sort that out for you. There is a 15 megabyte limit on documents, so if your document is larger than that, you have a choice of either compressing it, if you know how to do that, or separate it into 2 documents and label them appropriately. For example, 990 Part 1 and 990 Part 2. I also want to make a note that you'll be asked for your banking information, and you will be asked to provide your login credentials for your bank account and your password. This is how Lendistry distributes funds. This information will not be visible to Lendistry. It goes to a company called Plaid, which provides secure transaction services for large companies like Visa. More information about that is in our FAQs. But I will note that you don't need to provide your banking information until you know that you're going to receive a grant. And again, that's when you'll know that by when you receive your grant agreement via DocuSign. Next slide, please. We're going to turn to Lucy for more questions in just a moment, but let's advance the slides one more so that folks can take a look at the resources while we're talking. Lucy.
Okay, great. We do. We've got quite a few questions, and I know we are almost out of time. People have questions about all volunteer organizations. So if their staff are all volunteer, if they're just volunteer staff, are there any additional documents that they need to submit?
There are no additional documents, and we do want to make a note that you don't have to have staff to qualify for this program. If you're familiar with PPP, it was a payroll program, so you needed staff to qualify, but that's not the case for the relief grant.
Okay, and then if all of an organization's staff are contractors and there are no full-time or part-time employees, can they qualify?
They can qualify. Once again, you don't have to have people on staff in order to qualify. And when you get to those questions on the application that ask you about your the number of full-time employees, you can simply enter 0.
Okay. Now, if an organization that's applying, if the applicant is not a California resident, is that a problem if the organization is incorporated in California, but the operations director who will be completing the application is not?
That is not a problem.
Okay, great. And if the applicant was formerly incarcerated, does that make a difference?
There's no requirement around that at all. It doesn't make a difference.
Okay. And then if a nonprofit has hired a grant writer to apply, should they use the founder or executive director as the main contact and then use the grant writer's social security number and ID? How should they work that out?
The personal data has to be for the named applicant in the application. And let's remember that that person has to appear on the statement of information as one of the 3 principals. However, you can provide any email address that you want to. If you're a development director or a grant writer who's going to be monitoring communications from Lendistry, you can put your own email address in there. But please do make sure that the personal data you supply matches the person who is named as the applicant.
Okay, and then we had a couple of questions in the chat about, can you kind of work on your application without being on the official portal? Is there a way to do that, or look at a demo or something like that?
There are demos on the careliefgrant.com site, and also you can take a look through our FAQs. As I mentioned, it's designed to walk you through the application quickly and easily.
Okay, great, thank you. And then we have a specific question about a 501c3 that in 2019, on their 2019 990, it shows revenue over 2.5 million, but their 2020 990 shows a significant loss in 2020 due to COVID. So, and in that case, their revenue falls in the 1 million range. Are they eligible?
Unfortunately, no. Lendistry will only use your gross revenue as reported on your 2019 990 in order to qualify you for the program.
Okay, and quickly, we're at noon, so let's see. What does, again, can you just go over what a waiting selection process means?
Sure, it means that you're on the waiting list. And if you have double checked that you filled out the proper form of application for a nonprofit, then there's nothing more for you to do. Your application will automatically be considered for round 9.
Okay, and then just one more. One of the people on here is looking at the FAQ from Lendistry that references eligible use of funds as, in quotes, costs associated with reopening after a COVID closure. And they're just wanting to verify, is this true? And can it extend beyond the December 2020 since they're just
Again,
now reopening?
yes, got you. Again, the qualifying expenses have been incurred during the period of March 1st to December 31st in 2020, and you only need $1 of qualifying expenses in order to be able to qualify for this program. Once you receive your funds, you can spend them as you wish.
Okay, great. That's all the questions. Thank you,
Thanks so
Sue.
much, Lucy. And we're going to turn back to Jan in a moment to close us out.
Thank you so much, Sue and Lucy. As everybody else feeling like their heads are just like stuffed with information, you know, I have to say that this feels complicated because it's new. Many of us haven't filled out forms like this, but as a person that has written, you know, 20 zillion proposals to foundations and government, I have to say that actually it's simple in a lot of ways. And I really appreciate, Sue, your expertise, and Lucy, your parsing through the questions that we've gotten today. So next slide, just want to remind people that this was brought to you by, oh, sorry, we already know this, right? And I do want to say the FAQs are a little bit daunting because there's, I don't know, 10 million of them, but your answers are likely to be in there. That's how complete they are. Next slide. Just a reminder that we're able to bring you this webinar today for free because, in large part, because of CalNonprofits members. And I hope that you'll consider becoming a member before or after you get your grant. In addition to being part of our advocacy, the kind of advocacy that resulted in nonprofits being included in this program, it's also true that we have these other benefits. About 25,000 nonprofit employees get their health insurance through us, for example, and nonprofits can get discounts on rental cars. Not that people are going very far these days, but on office supplies and many other things. So just a reminder of that. And then just finally, just want to give a shout out again to our off-camera staff, Henry Duong from our staff, Vanessa Cruz also from our staff, and Jean Cregan, our closed captioner. So thanks to everybody. Thanks to all of you. Have a good lunch and get that grant. All right. Bye.